Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, November 26th, 2024, and today we are continuing Seed Week, talking about cedars. Dan Brisebois will join me again today to guide us in how to know what seeds make sense to produce in our regions, and we get a question about nonprofits. So let's do it. All right, I hope everyone has had a good start to their week so far. We've got some family in town, and this family likes soccer and has a baby who I can play with, so I'm having a great week. I'm definitely a baby nerd. I love babies, big fan. We stopped at 2 kiddos, which has been a perfect number for us, but I want everyone else around me to keep having babies because babies for president, all the babies. Anyway, cedars. That seems like a good transition and a good topic for Seed Week, right? Now, there are still some cedars out there that I have not tried, and I hope to get my hands on one of those cedars from Africa that can punch seed into thick cover crop mulch next year, so I can start playing with that idea more. But for now, for today, I'm going to keep it mostly to the mainstream cedars, which is an amusing phrase to say. But those are the ones that are available on the market right now. These are the cedars I get the most questions about, with a couple tossed in there for goofs. I also left a couple off that I didn't think were necessary. And again, I have not tried every cedar yet. So if you have any cedars you like that I don't mention, or I guess that you don't like that I do mention, feel free to discuss those in the comments. All right, so the 2 cedars that come up the most are definitely the Earthway cedar and the Jang, that's Jang cedar. The Earthway currently runs between $167 and $200 depending on where you get it. It also has a few bonus plates you can buy, though the plates that come with it are generally enough in my opinion. Plates just means the small interchangeable discs you can insert based on the size of the seeds you are hoping to sow. This to me is not just a great starter cedar, but it's a great cedar in general. It's a cedar I still use 10 years later. It's a great starter cedar because it is not complicated, and although the hopper, where the seeds go, can be a little frustrating at times, more often than not, you are getting good seed distribution, and you can see the seeds drop from behind, which makes it easy to know that you are successfully seeding whatever it is that you're trying to seed. On the pro side and the rhyming side, the price is nice. Again, we have had our Earthway for at least 10 years, and it's still fine, which makes a $200 investment quite worth it. The only thing that has ever needed changing is the belt, which can get worn out and kind of start slipping over time. The Earthway is lightweight and easily portable. The depth adjustment is fast and simple. I don't think there is a better entry-level cedar on the market, in my opinion. I use the Earthway for beans and peas, cover crops, and sometimes baby greens like lettuce mixes and spinach, though there is another cedar I use more often for things like arugula that we'll talk about in a minute. I do find that the Earthway carrot plate seeds a little too heavy for carrots, but there is a light carrot plate you can purchase that I prefer, or you can just separate your rows a bit more to allow for more lateral space. Or I suppose you could probably put some tape over a couple of those holes just to like thin it out a little bit. The beet plate is the one I use for rye and vetch plantings and that sort of stuff. On the con side, it gets clogged easy, the cedar does, right in the hopper. Before every seeding, you have to make sure to jam something into where the seeds come out, because spiders and wasps love to nest in there, and seeds will clog if you don't clean it out. You have to make sure to not fill the hopper too high, or it will also jam. The Earthway will also just absolutely demolish most pelleted seeds, so if it's the only cedar you have, stick with naked seeds as much as possible, naked just being non-pelleted, non-coated. I don't love the shoe either. This is the part of the cedar that separates the soil before the seeds are dropped. I prefer the double disc opener on the Jang, or even the one on the Haas cedar, which is not one I'm going to talk about, but if I added a 4th cedar to talk about, it would probably be the Haas. Overall, if you're looking at cedars, the Earthway is, to me and to many, a complete no-brainer. Or is it? Okay, it is, but there are others if you're willing to spend the money. Like the Jang is often considered the Cadillac of push cedars because it is so incredibly smooth, and also because it's expensive relative to the Earthway. The Jang is about $400 more than the Earthway. With a few rollers, the starter set for the JP1, meaning a single row cedar, you're looking at around $620 to $700, depending on how much you trick it out. Each additional roller, which is what the Jang uses instead of plates to singulate the seed, which itself is not really a word, but is a word that we growers use that means to drop seeds cleanly, one at a time. Anyway, each roller can run $20 to $40 unless you are printing them yourselves with a 3D printer or something, in which case I don't know what the cost is, but probably less than $20 to $40. Now, on the pro side, this thing is smooth and precise. It will land seeds exactly at the spacing you want them. The rollers come in a lot of different options. You can change the density in a few different ways. It's really well-made piece of equipment. I have the double disc opener that I received from paperpot.co years ago, and I highly recommend it, but it adds another $175 to the price. I love it dearly, but that cost is not nothing. It is better in the rougher bed conditions that we often have due to leaving the roots in the ground during the bed flips, like during when we're going from one crop to another. With the double disc opener on the Jang, than it is it can just kind of slice through the roots. Unlike the Earthway, that shoe just kind of pulls the roots up. We have had our Jang for 8 or more years, and like the Earthway, it is still going strong. On the con side, cost, of course, but also changing depths can be a little tough with the Jang. Most people don't change their seeding depths that much, but if I'm going from seeding carrots to seeding cover crops, I will drop my depth by half an inch or more. Also, sometimes I have a fresh, thick compost mulch where I will want to seed deeper than in older compost mulch, which has better water retention because it's kind of broken down. It's also awkward and heavy to carry the Jang around. Usually I am shoving all of my seeding stuff into a wheelbarrow or cart and dragging it out to the field, so it's not that big of a deal. But if I just need to go bust out a single bed real quick, the Jang is quite the beast to haul around. There are also versions of the Jang that have 2, 3, 5, and 6 hoppers. So that's like the JP1, JP2, JP3, and so on. But those obviously would be if you were doing a lot of baby greens or denser plantings on a fairly significant scale. If you're just starting out, max out the use of the JP1 before investing in one of the others. But you may find that you could really use the added efficiency of more rows per seeder. Last seeder I think is worth discussing is the 4-row pinpoint seeder. This is what I use for arugula almost exclusively, though sometimes I will plant baby kale and baby lettuce with it. I know some growers who use it for a lot of different stuff, even carrots, where they will just use the first hopper and the third hopper, leaving the other two empty. This seeder is around $300, so it's kind of in the middle of the other two, but I would have a hard time imagining this being someone's sole seeder in the way I can imagine either of the two being the only seeder you own. You can also buy an additional roll bar, that's a hard word to say, that allows for different seed sizes, but it's $130, which is almost the price of an Earthway. Now, on the pro side, the uniformity is really nice when you can get it dialed in, and for arugula in particular, it's almost perfect distribution. You can adjust the depth, how deep you plant it, by how you hold it, which could also be a negative, I suppose, because you could end up planting something at multiple depths and not getting uniform germination. But it is really nice at times to adjust with just how you hold it when you're going through like thick mulches and stuff. Also, it could save you a lot of steps, like literal footsteps in the garden on things like baby greens, as it is just one pass instead of 4. So versus like the JP4, it saves you hundreds of dollars. On the con side, well, there are quite a few. Adjusting the roll bar to the holes you want is super awkward. Adjusting the brushes gets a little wonky too. It's not as easy to see the seeds dropping like with the Jang and the Earthway seeders, so it's a little slower to get started and feel confident the seeds are dropping at the proper rates. And like the Earthway, jumping spiders love to clog the hopper. Cute little creatures that they are. Getting the excess seeds out after you sow is quite precarious as well. You kind of got to dump it into a tray and then pour that tray back into the seed container. Last, of course, bed prep has to be perfect or it will not seed well, and it gets clogged really easily in the deep compost. If I'm doing strictly deep compost mulching, I am probably avoiding the seeder. If I'm using a tilter or a power harrow and you're incorporating a little soil particles into your compost mulch, you're probably good to go. It pairs nicely with a bed roller as well that flattens the bed, but of course, money. There's also just the more adjustable 6-row pinpoint seeder that I do not possess, but runs much more smoothly than the 4-row and can be worth considering depending on your bed width. There is also a 1-row pinpoint seeder, which I have not tried, but it definitely looks fun. especially for maybe some interplanting or planting cover crops in between lettuces and that sort of stuff. So maybe on a small scale, that could be an option, but at $280, that's a tough call. So I would at very least start with other seeders before considering a pinpoint, but it's not off the list entirely. Anyway, what are your go-to seeders? Let me know. Up next, we'll get a quick word from our sponsor, and when we return, we'll talk nonprofit farms. BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast and feel compelled to support it, awesome. You can do so over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. There are also discounts for seeds and boots and tools and such over there, which maybe could help you get started on your seeds for next year. Just check the November show thread for those. Anyway, I try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Today's question comes from Patreon member Kyle Putnam, who writes, quote, someone, I think it was on one of the Growers Daily /No-Till Growers podcasts, recently said something about how it is increasingly hard to compete wage-wise with nonprofit farms. The nonprofit farms near me do a great job of supporting the local food banks, but I can imagine that could disrupt the labor market. If I was doing the exact same hard manual labor and could get paid above market rates thanks to donors instead of vegetable prices, I would pick that job too. Any other thoughts on that? I just think this is an interesting topic. End quote. So I agree, this is an interesting topic. I know that Alex Ball mentioned in the episode he co-hosted with me for Growers Daily that there were nonprofits near him paying super high wages. So maybe that's what you were thinking of, which I'm going to assume is more for the farm manager positions than like your general laborer, but perhaps not. Every nonprofit is different. The nonprofits I've spoken with mostly have a core group of managers who get paid reasonably well, sometimes with benefits. And then the farm itself relies on volunteer labor or stipend labor for large plantings and harvests, etc. But these are also often educational or research facilities or mission-based organizations that are not banging out a ton of food and hitting all the local farmers markets, so their paid labor requirements are generally lower. Instead of turning profits at like farmers markets, a lot of nonprofit farms' ability to pay high wages depends on that nonprofit's fundraising skills and grant writing abilities. But you could imagine training an employee and then that employee getting a relatively cushy management opportunity at the local nonprofit and leaving your farm when you can't match their offer. That would be a tough and deflating loss and impossible to compete with as a small business. It's one thing when you lose an employee to another commercial farm for better wages because that commercial farm is in roughly the same competitive environment as you, but it's a whole other thing when that farm has government or private donation support. That would be tough. In soccer, because you know I have to bring it into it, clubs often have to pay a transfer fee to move a player from one club to another so that the bigger clubs can't just take the best academy players from that original club because that original club has poured heaps of money and time into that player. But farms don't have a similar protection to the amount of time we invest in employees, and nor am I suggesting we should. That could get messy. I'm just comparing. But if the farm invests a ton of time and money in an employee and then the nonprofit reaps the rewards, that would stink. Stink for the farmer, of course, not for the employee, whom we are all obviously happy for and somewhat jealous of. Now, the complaints that I have largely heard over the years are less about wages and more about nonprofit farms and price competition with produce. I've not personally come into contact with or been noticeably affected by nonprofit farms selling produce on any sort of competitive scale, but farms have told me in the past they have a local nonprofit who is running a CSA, for instance, or selling at a market, and if not undercutting on price, is undercutting on production costs by having their overhead costs subsidized in a way that for-profit market gardens cannot. i.e. large donations or better access to grants, etc. I also know farms who benefit from nonprofits who buy their produce, so it could work in either direction. I want to be really clear that nonprofit farms are not a monolith, and many are doing exceptional work simply growing food and distributing it to food banks and other similar entities. Again, some of them supporting local for-profit farmers and businesses, or they're doing the expensive work of training farmers and researching agriculture that benefits all of us. I'm definitely neither pro nor anti nonprofit. Each entity, it has to be judged individually. So although there are perhaps nonprofits who occasionally complicate things for-profit farms, not every nonprofit is going to have that effect. The existence of local nonprofit farms is not, in that way, something I would necessarily concern myself with too much as a new grower looking to start a new farm. But it also wouldn't hurt to chat with growers nearby and see if they've had any issues with that. This may be a ridiculous thought experiment, but perhaps farmers could benefit from setting up regional nonprofits with other farms in their vicinity. And I guess what this would look like is you, the organic for-profit farm, operate like normal, but you are connected to a larger nonprofit that could help support you when you need to raise wages or capital to buy new tools, etc. You can point your customers towards this entity as a tax break and then receive funds based on your needs. I have no idea how that would work, or maybe there are examples of farms that already do that sort of thing that I'm not aware of, but would love to hear about in the comments section, or contact me however you contact me. But perhaps having access to similar funds that nonprofits do without yourself being a nonprofit levels the playing field. If you can go to your customers and say, I need a little money to keep X employee, it's tax deductible for you. Or maybe that's just a terrible idea. I have no idea. But I know that you will let me know about it in the comments. But anyway, thanks, Kyle. I don't know that I really answered your question, but I certainly rambled about it for a few minutes, which I hope was fun, or at least interesting, thought-provoking, infuriating, something. Up next, we're going to get Dan Brisebois back in here, host of the Seed Farmer podcast, to chat about deciding what seeds make sense to produce for you based on your context. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. Okay, so welcome back, Dan. Thanks again for joining me today. We're celebrating the release of your new book, The Seed Farmer, this week, available at no-tillgrowers.com, with a series of seed questions. And for today's question, I was wondering, what are some factors that one should consider when looking at what seeds to save or produce in their region?
You're thinking about growing seed in your region. I guess first off, almost anything will grow in your region, but some stuff is going to do better than others. And so your question means is how do you choose something to have the best results? And there's a couple of things you need to evaluate. And first is evaluate about your own region. So how humid are you? In terms of ambient humidity, but also does it rain anytime in the summer? Does it rain heavily, or are you in an area that's just dry all the time? So that's one thing to think about. Another thing might be to think about your frost dates, how late, how short your season is or not. And then you probably also the heat, how hot does it get? So those are all things that can have an impact, but the humidity is by far the biggest impact. And so different I can kind of break up the crops into 3 or 4 groups. I'm going to kind of make it up. Well, not make it up. I'm just going to remember as I go along. But there are some crops. So let's say you're in a humid area that's fairly hot. Crops that really, really love that are like the Solanaceae and the cucurbit crops, so like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, squash, cucumbers. These are all crops that love having that humidity, and they thrive in pretty hot conditions. And so you can get the fruit to maturity, which you might not be able to in a cooler climate. Um, and um, and I'm kind of talking about this a bit backwards, but when the seeds are protected in these crops, so they're not exposed to the outside environment, which means there's less chance of them getting contaminated with disease. And so those are the crops that do really good in a more humid climate or a hot climate. On the other hand, if you're in an area that's fairly humid, there's crops or a group of crops like the naked seeded crops. So stuff like the umbel family, like cilantro, dill, carrots, parsley. They're crops that just the seeds are just sitting there out in the air, just naked. But also stuff like lettuce. It's even though it's like it's a little kind of cup, the seed is just sitting there on top of it. So if it's raining, the seed can gather in that, the rain can gather in that little cup. Similar also for onions, leeks. So these are crops that they don't do as well in a humid climate. That could be as much, well, and part of it, even before getting to the seed, the plants have more chance of disease and of just dying before you get mature seed. And then if you have mature seed, there's chances of germination. Like if it's just always wet, the seed can germinate on the plant. So those are crops that really prefer a drier climate. And then there's crops that have seed pods. So like a bean or a pea that's in a pod, or like a brassica, which is in a pod. Those seeds are protected for the environment, so they can do well in they probably prefer a drier climate, but they can also survive in a humid climate. So I guess moisture is the main thing I've talked about here. If you have a particularly cool climate, it's going to be harder to get. Like, I guess to think about what does well in terms of what grows well in your vegetable garden. If you have a hard time maturing tomatoes outdoors for a vegetable crop, it's going to be the same as a seed crop. But in kind of cooler climates, there's a lot of the brassicas really like it when it's quite cool. Stuff like spinach might prefer it if it's on the cool side. So those are some of the considerations.
Yeah, brassicas hated here. That's generally speaking. They are not super happy in Kentucky, where we are hot and humid. And listening to you, I'm wondering, like, if I want to grow out a lettuce crop to save the seed on it, am I SOL in a hot, wet climate like Kentucky? Or is it something that I know I can occasionally do it, but is it something I can rely on, or what would I have to think about?
So there's the humidity and there's the heat. In terms of the humidity, so we're in a cooler, we still have a hot summer, but not as hot as yours for sure. But we can have a very humid summer. So on our farm, and I guess let's say for the listeners that we're outside of Montreal, just to kind of situate where we are. But we grow our our lettuce in greenhouses for seed, and we can get really high quality lettuce in a greenhouse and not worry about about rain and ambient humidity. So that's part of it. But the other part with lettuce is that if lettuce seed gets too hot, then it can go dormant, and that's what I might be afraid of if you were to grow lettuce seed in a greenhouse in your climate. Now, it's maybe the answer is if you're able to start it earlier in the season, it might go to flower earlier in the season and set seed before the big heats are on. But that might be a way around. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of thinking it through. Or you could put shade cloth on a tunnel or a greenhouse, and then you'd be able to have that cooler temperature and also have that water protection. But outdoors, like, you can probably grow lettuce seed outdoors. It's just not going to have the same yield, I would bet, than if you were doing it undercover. The thing to do also is just try stuff in your climate. And that's something that I really kind of push in the book, is to not you're so sure you want to have great seed and you want to do the best job, but when you're starting, don't worry to make if you're making mistakes, and take it easy on yourself and try stuff and see how it works. And you'll see some things do better than others, and the things that do better, adopt them more quickly. And the things that are having a hard time growing to seed on your farm, well, then maybe you could choose to put them aside and try something else. Or well, then every year that you see it, you're going to do a little bit better the next year. But take your time, learn it, and learn from it, and just get better each generation.
I love it. All right. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you coming by.
Pleasure.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that chat and this episode. You can pick up a copy of Dan's book, The Seed Farmer, at no-tillgrowers.com, and check out his podcast as well by searching for The Seed Farmer wherever you get podcasts or following the No-Till Growers Network feed. Also, the Living Soil Handbook is available at no-tillgrowers.com. In case you were looking to take care of all of your holiday purchases in one place. The kids will love it. Otherwise, I'm going to end it there. Huge shout out to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No-Till Growers. Sign up over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers to support our work, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of November, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to the weeklies are back. Maina, Stacy Moorman, Bill King, Byron Green, Chris Yates, and Stephen Smith were all out on a ski trip, and they were in Snowmass, Colorado, and they were enjoying themselves. They found some hot cocoa at the ski lodge, and then that's when they heard that there was a missing puppy brigade of skiing puppies, which is a thing, probably. And they had to go on a rescue mission deep in the woods of the Rocky Mountains to find all the puppies. And it was both gripping and adorable. So good on the weeklies. I just feel like they're doing great work right now. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We won't see you Thursday, remember, taking that day off, but we will see you tomorrow. All right.